Okay, so this video is going to be about carbs, and the number one thing you need to know about carbs is that they are for fuel. They are your energy. So if you were a car, there's a nice little car, and you wanted your car to run, here I'll put you sitting in your car. All right, if you wanted your car to run, you're going to have to put gas in it. Okay, so gas would be the fuel for the car to run, but for you, you're going to put in carbs. And we're going to learn today that carbs basically, you got three categories. You got monosaccharides, you have disaccharides, and you have polysaccharides. And all those saccharides mean sugar. Okay, so you fuel your car, you own sugar. Okay. So your main carb that you've all learned about is the C6H12O6. And you learned about it in photosynthesis, and most of you know it as glucose. There are other simple sugars. This is your basic simple sugar. So this is a monosaccharide because it is a single sugar, and you draw it kind of shaped like a hexagon. And each one of these little corners represents a carbon. So you get your 6 carbons, so that's your carbon ring. But there's also fructose. It's a different little bit of a derivative. And ribose. Ribose is the sugar that you find in RNA. But these are all monosaccharides and simple sugars. And this is what your body loves to get because this can eventually go into your mitochondria, and then your mitochondria, which is your powerhouse of the cell, uses it to break it down and get energy. And our molecule for energy is ATP. All right, so with your monosaccharides, that's your simple version, but most of the food you eat is going to come in the form of a disaccharide. Okay, and di means 2, and so it's going to be 2 glucose or fructose joined together. So it's 2 monosaccharides. So it's a C6H12O6 and a C6H12O6. But as you learned in the previous video, when a bond gets formed, a water molecule is released. And that water molecule is going to come from these monomers of glucose. So when you form a disaccharide, you have a monosaccharide plus a monosaccharide, and they make a bond. And a water is going to get released. So when we do the chemical formula for a disaccharide, the C6H12O6 plus a C6H12O6, which should be a C12H24O12, but you have to account for losing a water molecule. So an actual disaccharide's formula is C12H22O11. Okay, so you have to know how to do the math for disaccharides and polysaccharides based on the understanding that every time you make a bond, you lose a water. So for example, if you have a poly, so that's going to be more than 2 saccharide, that let's say it has 10 monomers or 10 monosaccharides, and I needed you to do the math, the chemical formula for that, you would take a C6H12O6 because that's 1 monomer, and then you would multiply it by 10 because you have 10 of them. So that should be a C60H120O60. But we have to account for the water that gets lost. So if there's 10 monomers, that means there's 9 bonds, and every bond is a water. So we have to do 1 water times 9, which is H18O9. So when this polysaccharide gets built, this is what it should have, but it has to lose 9 waters in the process. So we will subtract H18 and O9. So that's going to be O51 H, or 60, and then we would say 2, so 102. Okay, so that is the actual chemical formula for a polysaccharide with 10 monosaccharides. So you need to be able to do the math depending on what type of polysaccharide I ask for. Okay, so monosaccharides, one single sugar, disaccharides, two of them, and then polysaccharides. This is where you're going to get most of your energy from, is in the polysaccharides. Your disaccharides, let me go back to that one real quick. Those are sucrose, okay, which is table sugar. So sodas, candy, drinks, things like that. You're going to get a lot of sucrose. And so you do get it, but it's fast, quick energy. So if you are feeling really lethargic and you feel like your blood sugar has gotten low, if you get you some candy or a soda or juice is a great source of sucrose. It'll give you a quick pick-me-up, but it's not going to last very long because it doesn't have a whole lot of bonds to break. And then we learned in the last video that your energy is in the bonds, okay? So with polysaccharides, they must have a lot of bonds, and they absolutely do. A polysaccharide is somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 monosaccharides, okay, on average. So it can actually be more, it can be a little bit less, but that's what you're getting when you eat a polysaccharide. So there are 4 main categories of polysaccharides. The first one I'm going to start with is starch. All right, starch is the one that all of us crave. And the reason we crave it is because it contains the absolute most calories, most energy of all of the carbohydrates. So your starches are going to be rice, bread, pasta, potatoes. Okay, so all of these things are the way that plants store their biggest molecules so that they'll have food for later. So these are the ones we love the most, and it's evolutionary craving because we're going to get the most energy out of these. All right, so when you eat a potato, you're eating thousands of molecules that are at least 100,000 monosaccharides long. So they're constantly breaking bonds. So you're getting so much energy. So you get a lot of ATP, which is very good. The problem is if you eat more than you need, your body loves them so much that they're going to store them for later. And they're going to store them in the form of fat. So this is where high carb diets can cause a lot of weight gain because your body will not get rid of carbs if they can help it because they want to keep all the carbs they can. Just like if this was money, okay, this would be $100,000 paycheck. You just going to give that away? No, you're going to keep it and you're going to store it because you never know when you get in that next $100,000 paycheck. All right, second one is cellulose. All right, and cellulose is in the cell wall of plants. Okay, so it is undigestible by humans. Okay, cows and deer and different animals that just walk around all day long grazing, they can break it down, but cellulose, the strands of polysaccharides actually weave together and form this whole labyrinth of strands. So it's so hard to break them down because they're overlapped and interwoven. So the cell wall of plants is cellulose, and we call it fiber. And so anytime you eat a plant, every single part of it is made of plant cells. So you're always going to get fiber from the plants that you eat. Not a lot of energy from it, and that's why celery is mostly cellulose, and that's why celery, you don't get a whole lot of calories from it because it's just basically all fiber. You can't even break the bonds. All right, then we have, I'll go with chitin. Chitin next. Chitin is in the cell wall of fungus. Okay, and it helps mushrooms have sturdy, rigid cell walls because they don't have a skeleton. But it's also in the exoskeleton of insects. So basically, when you step on a bug and you hear it crunch, okay, that is its little shiny, crunchy, sugary shell that you have just crunched. It's made of chitin. So if you ate a bug, you would actually get some protein from their little tiny muscles, and you would get some carbs from their shell. Yum, I know. All right, so still, most of us are going to stick with our starches. All right, so starch, most common, where you get the most calories. Cellulose in the cell wall, undigestible, so you're not getting a whole lot of calories from it. Chitin is just another polysaccharide that you're going to find in the cell wall of a fungus and an exoskeleton. And a fun fact, internal stitches get made out of chitin because when you have surgery and they do stitches on the inside, these will naturally over time dissolve because they're basically just a sugar base. All right, and then number 4 is glycogen. Okay, now I'm going to talk about glycogen on its own page. Here you are, okay? And in your body, if you need energy, most of it's going to come from food that you eat, okay? But if you run out of energy, your body will get it from fat storages. But what if there's an emergency? Okay? Emergency, okay? You've got something called fight or flight. You have adrenaline rush, something crazy happens, and you've got to be fast, strong, run away, fight. You've got to make some big decisions. Right here is an organ called the liver. All right, and the liver stores this emergency sugar supply called glycogen. And it's emergency only. And if you have an adrenaline rush, then your liver is going to respond to the adrenaline, and it's going to dump out all of this glycogen. And glycogen is a huge polysaccharide that's full of energy. And so for a quick second, it dumps it all into your bloodstream, and you're able to supply all your cells with as much sugar as they need to get as much energy as you need for that moment. Now, after you use it up, you usually feel real tired and you sweat and all those kind of things. But it's a very important thing for emergency situations. You also can have a little bit of glycogen embedded in the center of each of your big muscles so that when they get the signal from adrenaline, they can also respond quickly. But if you notice, most everything we talked about with carbs, plant, okay? And the only animal part, besides the bug shell, that really is going to give you any carbohydrates is the liver. And because of that, out in the wild, when animals hunt each other, this is literally their favorite part of the animal that they eat. They love to eat the liver because it gives them so many calories and so much energy. Okay, so to sum it all up, carbs, okay, you have the monosaccharides, the disaccharides, and the polysaccharides, okay? Monosaccharides, your most common example is glucose. Disaccharide, sucrose, or lactose is another one, which is the sugar in milk. And then polysaccharides, you have your 4 categories. You have starch, you have chitin, you have cellulose, and you have glycogen. Okay, so that's the one in the liver. All right, so the elements are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and nothing else. And usually they are in about a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. And because they're a little imbalanced is because you lose water every time you make a bond. All right, the bonds, the name of the bonds are called glycosidic linkages. Okay, so you have your monomer with your next monomer. So these are your monosaccharide and a monosaccharide, and then this is your glycosidic linkage. Calories. Calories are how we measure how much energy is in food. And every single carb, a piece of apple, a piece of banana, a piece of potato, a piece of liver. Okay, it's pretty gross. If we have a 1 gram sample of a carb, does not matter what type of carb it is, each one of them will give you 4 calories per gram. And so what that means is if you have a potato that's 10 grams and you have an apple that's 10 grams, both of them will be 40 calories. So it doesn't matter that one's a potato and one's an apple. It's just whichever the 40 grams, I mean the 10 grams, 40 calories. All right. Foods, most of the time, the foods you're going to get it from are going to be plant-based, but you can get a little bit of carbs from animals, and that's by eating liver. And the number one purpose is for fuel. Okay, your body's going to eat carbs and use them for energy, and then if they can't use them, then they're going to save them. But otherwise, they just really don't use your carbs to build anything. That's going to be the job of proteins.